On a cold morning in January 1889, the world woke to a terrifying announcement from the Viennese court. Crown Prince Rudolf, heir to the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his young mistress, Baroness Mary Vetsera, had died in a tragic double suicide at the remote Mayerling hunting lodge. That is the romantic, comforting myth the Habsburg dynasty spent a century perpetuating. The truth is a brutal, cold-blooded political secret. The forensic evidence, hidden, suppressed, and later destroyed, strongly suggests that the Mayerling Incident was not a suicide pact, but a double murder orchestrated by high-ranking political or royal agents. The bodies were mutilated, the crime scene was meticulously cleaned, and the crown immediately launched a terrifying, massive cover-up to protect the image of the monarchy. Prince Rudolf was an anti-authoritarian liberal who planned to challenge his father, Emperor Franz Joseph, and his policies. This made him a powerful political threat, and the greatest secret of the Habsburg court is that the emperor's own officials may have chosen assassination over a dynastic crisis. The greatest secret of the Habsburg crown is that the empire sacrificed its own heir to preserve its terrifying absolute stability. Don't you dare look away. Watch this entire deep dive documentary and subscribe to Crown of Dread, and you will learn the one secret about Mary Vetsera's body that proves the initial official autopsy report was a complete, calculated lie. The agonizing core of the conspiracy was the political fear Rudolf inspired in his father, a fear that turned the crown into his greatest enemy. Crown Prince Rudolf was an anomaly in the rigid conservative Habsburg court. He was an intellectual, a fierce proponent of liberal ideas, and a political radical who secretly published anonymous, critical articles attacking his father's conservative regime. He openly favored a closer alliance with France and supported the independence movements of Hungary. Rudolf's political stance made him not only a headache for Emperor Franz Joseph, but a direct, terrifying political threat to the stability of the dual monarchy. The emperor feared that Rudolf, upon ascending the throne, would dismantle the conservative alliance with Germany and cause the internal breakup of the diverse empire. Rudolf was constantly surrounded by spies, managed by the emperor's secret police, and his liberal friends were often arrested or monitored. The prince was deeply unhappy, frustrated by his lack of political influence, and consumed by depression, a psychological state ruthlessly exploited by the plotters. This is the ultimate historical example of internal political conflict. The Habsburg court shows that when an heir holds opposing political views, the reigning regime often views its own successor as the most dangerous internal enemy, requiring constant surveillance and control. But the tragic affair with Mary Vetsera began not in passion, but with a cold, calculated move by a ruthless palace broker. Baroness Mary Vetsera was a beautiful but politically naive 17-year-old girl. Her affair with the 30-year-old crown prince was dismissed as a romantic indiscretion, but the evidence suggests her involvement was carefully orchestrated. The initial meeting and subsequent rapid affair between Rudolf and Mary Vetsera was facilitated by Countess Marie Larisch, a powerful court insider and cousin of Rudolf, who served as a social and political broker in the Viennese high society. Larisch, a known manipulator, was deeply involved in the secret political machinations of the Habsburg elite. Mary Vetsera became the perfect vulnerability. She was young, easily controlled, and her family was politically insignificant. By initiating and escalating the affair, the plotters ensured that Rudolf's last moments were spent in a remote location, engaging in an easily discreditable scandal that could be weaponized for a cover-up. This situation illustrates the terrifying historical precedent of using personal vulnerability as political leverage. The Habsburg court showed that personal relationships are often ruthless tools used by political rivals to expose, isolate, and ultimately destroy their targets. But the most shocking crime was the political betrayal that occurred moments after the bodies were discovered, a horrifying ritual of concealment. The moments immediately following the discovery of the bodies at Mayerling in 1889 were not marked by sorrow, but by a frantic, brutal ritual of concealment orchestrated by Emperor Franz Joseph's secret police. The official lie was immediately fabricated. Rudolf died of a heart attack or a suicide pact. The bodies were hastily dressed and manipulated. Mary Vetsera's body was treated with particular ruthlessness. She was dressed in a hat and coat, placed rigidly upright in a carriage, and smuggled out of the hunting lodge to a remote cemetery as the church forbade the burial of suicides in consecrated ground. This secret, grotesque nighttime journey was essential to maintain the fiction of the suicide pact. The crown needed to control the narrative, and the bodies were the last pieces of evidence that needed to be silenced. Every detail of the crime scene was meticulously cleaned and suppressed by the emperor's agents. This demonstrates the ultimate historical manipulation of the truth. The Habsburg monarchy showed that a regime's first priority in a crisis is to control the narrative, often through grotesque deception and the desecration of the dead, proving that absolute power creates its own reality. But the ultimate scientific proof that the official story was a lie was revealed only after a secret exhumation of Mary Vetsera's body. The official 1889 autopsy report claimed that Crown Prince Rudolf died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, and Mary Vetsera died the same way. But this official narrative was shattered a century later by secret investigations in forensic science. Secret exhumations and later forensic analyses revealed shocking, crucial evidence. Mary Vetsera's body showed no clear signs of a bullet wound in her skull. Instead, forensic analysis indicated massive, crushing blunt force trauma to her head, suggesting she was struck violently before or during her death. Furthermore, records show Rudolf's skull damage was inconsistent with a quick suicide. The evidence strongly supports the theory that the suicide pact was a convenient cover for a politically motivated double murder. The killers, likely the emperor's secret police or agents of a political rival, executed Mary Vetsera first, then killed the prince and staged the scene. This case illustrates the chilling historical reality of forensic cover-ups. It proves that when the state is the ultimate criminal, the first casualty is truth, and that modern science is often the only tool capable of unearthing secrets suppressed for generations. We have traced the conspiracy from the rebel prince to the staged suicide. But the darkest secret remains hidden: the truth about the emperor's final desperate act to secure the succession. Crown Prince Rudolf's political and personal life was a constant source of agony for his father, Emperor Franz Joseph. The emperor, a rigid conservative figure, viewed his liberal reformist son as a devastating threat to the foundations of the monarchy. Just hours before the Mayerling Incident, Rudolf had a final catastrophic confrontation with his father. Rudolf demanded permission to divorce his wife, Princess Stephanie, whom he despised, and marry his new love, the actress Mitzi Kaspar, whom he preferred over Mary Vetsera. Emperor Franz Joseph refused, demanding Rudolf end his scandalous affairs. The argument was so violent that the emperor allegedly struck Rudolf across the face or pointed a single cold finger at his son, condemning his behavior as high treason against the dynasty. This final, brutal confrontation proved to Rudolf that his only path to power or personal freedom was through direct opposition to his father, a path that was already being sealed by the conspirators. This confrontation is the ultimate historical example of autocracy destroying its own succession. Franz Joseph proved that the maintenance of his personal conservative authority was more important than the happiness or even the sanity of his heir, a pattern of rigid control that often destroys legacy. But the most shocking secret of Rudolf's final night was that Mary Vetsera was not his first choice for the suicide pact, a fact that completely undermines the official story. The official myth required Mary Vetsera to be the sole, tragic focus of Rudolf's final passion. But the truth, revealed in later accounts, is that Rudolf first proposed the suicide pact to his long-term mistress and confidant, the actress Mitzi Kaspar. Mitzi Kaspar, a strong, level-headed woman, refused Rudolf's desperate proposal of a suicide pact. Furthermore, shortly before his death, Rudolf sent Mitzi a final desperate message and a large sum of money. Kaspar, realizing the depth of Rudolf's instability and political danger, actually reported her fears about Rudolf's suicidal ideations to the police. The emperor's secret police ignored Kaspar's direct warning, dismissing the suicide threat as hysteria. Their inaction is the smoking gun. The police, already monitoring Rudolf closely, chose to ignore the warning, suggesting that the authorities were either complicit in the prince's demise or willingly allowed him to proceed with self-destruction to resolve the political crisis. This situation illustrates the terrifying historical precedent of willful ignorance by the state. The police chose to prioritize the emperor's political convenience over the life of the heir, showing that when the death of a powerful person benefits the regime, warnings are simply erased. But the most brutal act of the cover-up was the clandestine burial of Mary Vetsera, a ritual of desecration designed to erase her existence. The Catholic Church forbade the burial of suicides in consecrated ground, and Mary Vetsera's body was a political embarrassment. The crown's solution was a terrifying, grotesque violation of her remains. To hide the true cause of death and avoid a scandal, the emperor's agents smuggled Mary Vetsera's body out of Mayerling at night. Her body was placed rigidly upright in a carriage, dressed in a heavy coat and hat, with a walking stick tied around her waist to keep her upright, pretending she was alive. This gruesome charade was performed to deceive local officials. Her body was then secretly buried in a remote rural cemetery. When forensic specialists secretly exhumed her body decades later, they found massive damage inconsistent with a single bullet, confirming the cover-up. This terrifying journey was the ultimate act of damnatio memoriae, the crown's attempt to erase the inconvenient mistress from history. This is a chilling historical example of state-sanctioned desecration. The Habsburg monarchy showed that controlling the dignity of the dead is a powerful political tool, using elaborate, horrifying rituals to enforce a lie and save their public image. But the true source of Rudolf's suicidal despair was a secret, horrifying genetic illness that plagued the Habsburg male line. Crown Prince Rudolf's profound depression and mental instability were not merely the result of political frustration. They were exacerbated by a chilling genetic inheritance from his Habsburg lineage. Rudolf suffered from a series of debilitating physical and mental ailments, including severe gastrointestinal problems, chronic headaches, and profound, crippling depression. Historians suspect that the chronic inbreeding of the Habsburgs, as seen with Charles II, led to a severe predisposition to mental illnesses, including bipolar disorder or acute clinical depression. To cope with the pain and the depression, Rudolf became secretly addicted to morphine, which was easily obtained at the time. This dependence intensified his despair and anxiety, making him an easy target for manipulation and pushing him closer to the final act. This tragedy underscores the historical truth that power cannot cure biology. The Habsburg crown's pursuit of political purity through inbreeding ultimately resulted in a genetically and mentally fragile heir, demonstrating that the biological costs of dynastic ambition are absolute. But the final terrifying piece of evidence about the murder was a secret police file, a document that proved the emperor's officials were tracking Mary Vetsera for weeks before the incident. The Habsburg monarchy maintained a vast, elaborate network of secret police and informants. Crown Prince Rudolf was one of the most heavily surveilled individuals in the empire. Secret police files, later discovered, proved that Emperor Franz Joseph's agents had been tracking Mary Vetsera and Rudolf for weeks before the Mayerling Incident. The authorities knew the location, the nature of the affair, and, critically, the prince's deteriorating mental state. Their failure to intervene is the ultimate evidence of state complicity. The secret police were tasked with gathering evidence that could either neutralize Rudolf's political threat or provide a strong cover story in the event of a crisis. Their failure to act on the concrete threats of suicide strongly suggests that Rudolf's death was viewed by the highest authorities as a politically convenient solution to the problem of a liberal heir. This illustrates the terrifying reality of the surveillance state and political inaction. The Habsburg Empire proved that knowledge is not always used to prevent harm. It can be used to monitor and manage a crisis to ensure the outcome benefits the ruling power. We have traced the conspiracy from the rebellion to the staged suicide. But the darkest secret remains: the truth about the emperor's final desperate act to secure the succession. The greatest tragedy of the Mayerling Incident was the reaction of Emperor Franz Joseph. Faced with the murder or suicide of his only son and heir, the emperor's first and only priority was not grief, but the preservation of the monarchy's flawless image. Emperor Franz Joseph personally dictated the cover-up, ordering the immediate fabrication of the suicide narrative. He commanded that every piece of evidence, letters, diaries, and medical reports be suppressed or destroyed. He enforced this lie with absolute authority, threatening anyone who questioned the official story with imprisonment or worse. The emperor's denial was so absolute that he forced the priests and officials involved to violate sacred religious and legal laws. He treated the truth itself as a political enemy that had to be neutralized to ensure the crown's stability. This situation illustrates the chilling historical precedent of regime self-interest overriding familial love. Franz Joseph proved that for an absolute monarch, the political brand is always more sacred than the life or death of one's own child, a pattern of cold, public denial seen in autocratic states today. But the most shocking fact about the crime scene was the absence of a crucial piece of evidence that totally contradicts the suicide theory. The official report claimed that Crown Prince Rudolf and Mary Vetsera died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds. However, police reports and later forensic re-examinations revealed a massive, undeniable flaw in this narrative. The bullet used to kill Mary Vetsera was never found. The staged crime scene was meticulously cleaned, but the imperial police failed to account for the physical evidence. The lack of an exit wound or a clear entry point on the skull, in Vetsera's case, combined with the missing bullet, strongly suggests that the weapon was used to stage a suicide, or that the fatal blow was delivered by an entirely different means, blunt force trauma, as later evidence suggested. Furthermore, the gun found at the scene belonged to Rudolf, but experts noted that the position of the bodies and the nature of the wounds made a double suicide technically improbable. The assassination theory gains traction from this one critical piece of missing evidence. This demonstrates the historical danger of official crime scene management. The Habsburg monarchy showed that a cover-up can suppress a truth for decades, but the physical evidence, the missing bullet, remains the silent final accuser of the state. But the final terrifying piece of evidence about Mary Vetsera's murder was revealed only after a doctor committed an act of gross desecration to hide the truth. The desperate attempt to maintain the suicide narrative required the complicity of the highest medical and religious authorities. Mary Vetsera's body was a problem because the visible trauma was inconsistent with a simple suicide. To smuggle Mary Vetsera's body out of Mayerling and prepare it for the clandestine burial, the royal physician was ordered to hide the devastating cranial injuries. He was forced to fit a heavy, rigid neck brace, or thick bandages, around her head and neck, covering the wounds and stabilizing the body for the grotesque carriage ride. This medical deception was essential to maintain the illusion that she was still alive when she was transported, a horrifying act of desecration carried out by a doctor compelled by the state. The neck brace was not a medical tool, it was a political prop, ensuring the lie survived the first critical hours of the cover-up. This illustrates the terrifying historical precedent of medicine-serving tyranny. The Habsburg regime proved that under absolute rule, the medical profession can be forced to abandon ethics and actively participate in political crimes, using their expertise for concealment rather than healing. But the ultimate long-term consequence of Mayerling was the destruction of the Habsburg succession, a collapse that guaranteed the end of the empire. Crown Prince Rudolf was the only son and heir of Emperor Franz Joseph. His death was not just a family tragedy. It was a political catastrophe that destabilized the fragile Austro-Hungarian Empire. Rudolf's death removed the last, most viable, and most internationally recognized heir to the throne. The succession passed to the emperor's brother, and then, critically, to his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This shift destabilized the entire European balance of power. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914, the ultimate successor, was the spark that ignited World War I, directly leading to the collapse of the Habsburg Empire. Historians argue that the political and moral shockwave created by the Mayerling cover-up was the first fatal flaw that led to the empire's eventual demise. The monarchy's inability to cope with its own internal crisis created a chain of events that consumed Europe. This demonstrates the profound historical principle of consequences and causality. The secret murder of an heir in 1889 created a political vacuum that, 25 years later, led directly to a global catastrophe, proving that seemingly small acts of political deceit can have unforeseen, massive repercussions. We have traced the terrifying tragedy from the initial political dispute to the final global catastrophe. Now, for the final critical verdict, we must confront the moral cost of the emperor's choice. We have unsealed the dark secrets of the Mayerling Incident, the political desperation of Crown Prince Rudolf, the conspiracy that murdered him and his mistress, the grotesque concealment of the bodies, and the emperor's unforgivable denial of the truth. The Mayerling Incident was the point where the Habsburg dynasty chose image over truth, sacrificing justice and decency to maintain the illusion of its own flawlessness. The tragic death of the heir was the silent ticking clock that led directly to the end of the empire. We have revealed the entire horrifying truth. But now, we turn the final question to you, the crown of dread audience. The Habsburg monarchy sacrificed the truth, claiming suicide, and desecrated Mary Vetsera's body to prevent political panic and maintain the stability of the empire. Was Emperor Franz Joseph's choice to commit this ultimate, cynical cover-up an act of necessary statecraft to protect the crown? Or was it a final, unforgivable crime that destroyed the moral foundation of the empire and hastened its final collapse? Let the world know your verdict. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe to Crown of Dread for more hidden history.